Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Good Boxing Podcast with your host, Josh Sias. And I have a fantastic episode here for you today. Now, everyone knows the biggest fight of the year, hands down, right now, is Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr., right? The fight's going to take place in August. And when you think about the top welterweights at 147, you immediately cannot mention Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. However, Manny Pacquiao, the legend amongst us living, right? The living legend basically among us right now, is throwing a wild card into the mix. And I want to let you know that when you think about Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao, it seems like just a fun matchup we want to watch. Pacquiao just came off his destruction of Keith Thurman, where when was the last time you heard anything from Keith Thurman? I know he's been depressed, he gained some weight, and now you kind of see him around here and there talking about training and losing weight and getting back into the gym. But since that loss, you have not seen Keith Thurman, right? And this is why this video is being made today. I was doing some thinking, and I'm going to literally sit here and tell you that Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence Jr. is hands down the most important fight at 147 of this era. And I know that's a proclamation that seems a little hyperbolic and a little bit out there, but Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao is a fight that's going to determine how great, truthfully, is this era of boxing at 147. Now, when you think about this new era of 147 and you think about the new school of 147, the glory division, the welterweight division, you think of the class of Danny Garcia, Errol Spence Jr., Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, right? Manny Pacquiao, who's in the mix. But if you really think about it, he was part of that last era of 147 pounds where you had the Floyd Mayweathers, Manny Pacquiao, Shane Mosley, and the list goes on and on. Margarito, that kind of class when I'm talking about the older era of boxing. But for this potential new class, the leaders were, again, Keith Thurman was a top tier welterweight until he lost to Manny Pacquiao. Errol Spence seems to just be a belt chaser, destroying everyone. Sean Porter, he beat Sean Porter, he beat Danny Garcia. He's beaten the best of the best. Kell Brook, you talk about it, he's fought them and he's beaten them. So when I look back and really think about how important this fight is, Manny Pacquiao could potentially downgrade an entire era by beating Errol Spence. If Pacquiao somehow beats Errol Spence, right? In my opinion, I have Errol Spence winning, but Manny Pacquiao is a great, great fighter. And truthfully, I wouldn't be surprised if he beats Errol Spence. But the implications, besides of what I think is going to happen, I'm going to take that completely out. So don't think like, hey, I'm picking Manny Pacquiao or hey, I'm picking Errol Spence. Right now, I don't know who's going to truthfully win. I'm leaning towards Errol Spence, but I haven't made a prediction yet. I'm going to look at the fights. I want to see how Errol fights Southpaws. I haven't seen it in a while, and I'm going to go down that rabbit hole later on. But when I'm talking about the implications of how much this fight means, you have to think about it, right? If Manny Pacquiao beats Keith Thurman, then Errol Spence, that immediately downgrades every win that Sean Porter has. That downgrades every win that Danny Garcia has. It downgrades every win that Keith Thurman has. And truthfully, it's going to downgrade Errol Spence as a champion as well. And then to just go down the line, if at any point we get the fight where Terrence Crawford fights Errol Spence Jr., how much does it really mean? Because if you think about it, everyone likes to compare the old to the new. It happens in basketball, it happens in baseball. People are saying, oh, the game is softer than it used to be, or the fighters of old are way more complete and better than the fighters of the new age. And in very, very rare instances, right, do we get the opportunity to see someone that's from a different era fight in a current era and actually be competitive, let alone win. That's why that win against Keith Thurman is so major for Manny Pacquiao, because Keith Thurman was in his prime. He had just come off of wins over some of the best welterweights in the world. He was undefeated, had no blemishes. Sure, he struggled against some people. Everyone kind of remembers a lot of the fights were they were close. Sean Porter, Keith Thurman was close. Um, you had Josecito Lopez, Keith Thurman, where he almost got knocked out with that body shot. Keith Thurman had to hold on to survive. And there were instances where Keith Thurman was in trouble. But Manny Pacquiao thoroughly beat Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman, a lot of people don't remember, was competitive in that fight. But the knockdown, it was clear Manny Pacquiao won. It was a split decision. A lot of people don't remember that. But I thought Pacquiao won, and you can make the case that Pacquiao won clearly, especially given the fact that Pacquiao was supposed to be washed up and on his way out. Keith Thurman was talking about how he's going to retire Manny Pacquiao and a bunch of other nonsense that he was talking. Hindsight 2020. I thought he was going to beat Pacquiao, and a lot of people thought that Pacquiao was going to get knocked out by Keith Thurman. The odds makers even had Pacquiao, I think it was like plus 185, which is almost a 2-1 underdog against a champion that, if you really think about his resume, he fought the top of the top, but never fought a world champion like Manny Pacquiao. So that's why this fight, in my opinion, might be the most important fight for 147 in this era. And I think low key, I know Keith Thurman probably wants Errol Spence to lose to Manny Pacquiao, in my opinion, because then he's going to be like, oh, you see Pacquiao beat Spence, and he's going to kind of be like, oh, it exonerates me because another one of my contemporaries lost. But I feel Keith Thurman should be rooting for Errol Spence, because if Errol Spence, Keith Thurman both lose to a legend of the last era, it's just going to completely, utterly say this era isn't as good as the last one. And you know what? Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao are legends, and you have to sit here and say they're legends. Sure, Floyd beat Pacquiao. Some people feel like Pacquiao won. I'm not going to go down that whole thing either, but it should make us appreciate how good the last era at 147 was and how good those two guys were. Because if Pacquiao comes and beats Errol Spence, these new guys, truthfully, in history, their wins are really going to just be, I'm not going to sit here and say nothing, but it immediately downgrades them. The Errol Spence and Crawford fight isn't going to be as big. Why? Because, sure, in terms of contemporaries and being the top of their division, they won't even be considered that. They'll be considered second tier to Manny Pacquiao. Because if Manny Pacquiao beats Errol Spence, you're going to have to start putting him at the top of the pound for pound list. I know Canelo and all these whatever, Canelo is doing his thing, and he probably will be number one, especially if he becomes undisputed with Caleb Plant and or fights Arthur Beterbiev. Fine. Canelo's spot arguably is solidified, but you're going to have to knock Terrence Crawford down. You're going to have to knock down Inoue. You're going to have to knock down Tio and Lomachenko and all these people, because if Manny fucking Pacquiao beats Errol Spence and has two of the top tier welterweights, number one, at this age, and all of his accomplishments from before that, you got to start putting this guy number two pound for pound. He's going to beat another pound for pound list great in Errol Spence. How is Terrence Crawford going to be ranked above Manny Pacquiao if he beats Errol Spence? He fought the guy that he seems to not be able to get in the ring. I'm not sitting here and saying that Terrence Crawford's scared, but if he beats Errol Spence, immediately becomes pound for pound above Terrence Crawford, in my opinion, because you're beating a top tier welterweight at the age of 42. You're going to have to put on a showcase. Errol Spence is coming off of wins against Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, and the list goes on and on. So I don't know how at 147, Sean Porter shouldn't be rooting for Errol Spence to win. Keith Thurman should be begging that Errol Spence beats Pacquiao. Terrence Crawford should be begging that Errol Spence beats Pacquiao, because immediately their resumes are going to be bullshit, in my opinion, in comparison to the last era. I'm not going to sit here and say they're shit fighters because they're talented, but you see it all the time. If the young lions cannot beat the old lion, it's literally built into nature. The old lion eventually gets old and the young guy comes and takes him over. This is what needs to happen in this division because if it doesn't, immediately the division is going to be perceived as weaker and second to the last era, right? If you want to get over the Pacquiao, if you want to get over the Mayweathers, if you want to get over the old kind of guard, somebody like Errol Spence has to go in there and beat the dog shit out of Pacquiao and just say like, "Hey man, retire. You just can't hang with us." And right now, the first guy that stepped up, the first young lion that tried, Keith Thurman, failed at it. He lost. So if another young top tier welterweight doesn't go in there and handle his business, this entire era is going to be perceived as second tier. And in my opinion, it should be. Because if Pacquiao at 40 plus goes in there and beats the best of the best at 147, because yeah, Terrence Crawford, he's not fighting Terrence Crawford, he's fighting Errol Spence, and he's fought Keith Thurman. But if you beat two of the top guys, immediately his resume is better than the majority of people at 147. And that's not talking about Floyd. That's not talking about all of the other fighters at 147 that he's fought. Not De La Hoya, the list goes on and on. This fight is hands down the most important fight at 147 in this era and in a very, very long time. Because this fight, the implications of it, if Errol Spence loses, might change history. It might change where Pacquiao is in history because that win over Keith Thurman can be perceived as maybe a fluke or a one-time thing. But if you do it again, oh my God, we just got to call Pacquiao an alien, truthfully. I know Bernard Hopkins is someone that was called the alien because he kept surprising and surprising people at this age. But if Pacquiao wins, it immediately says that the old era of 147 is better than the new era. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, you're going to have to sit here and just be like, yeah, you're right. The guys at 147 last era are better than this era. But the beautiful thing is in August, we get to see what happens. And truthfully, I just want to see a good ass fight. I don't know who's going to win yet. I think Errol Spence should win. Younger, stronger, bigger. But Pacquiao's fresher at this age. Maybe the long layoffs are helpful for him. He gets a big payday, gets to kind of sit down, get into a long training camp, rest up, no shoulder injuries. Errol Spence, we still don't know. Danny Garcia didn't push him as hard as maybe I thought he would in that fight. But who knows? Maybe Errol's still hurt. Who knows? And honestly, Pacquiao has the skills to do it. He really, really does. And if he does, good for him. And boxing again is back. And wow, if Pacquiao beats Errol Spence, 147 is not only the glory division of boxing, which it is, but the downgrade these guys would take in terms of legacy and how good they are in terms of quality, because anyone could win a fight, right? But if Errol Spence loses, wow. So that's the episode for today. Pacquiao versus Errol Spence. Let me know what you feel. Feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about my theory. If you're interested, make a prediction and I'll write back to you, let you know how I feel about things. But right now, I'm not going to make a solid prediction. I'm leaning towards Errol, but don't quote me on that. Pacquiao fans, you guys root hard for your man, and I love that. And I may be riding with Pacquiao on this one too. Who knows? But truthfully, I know all those guys out there better be rooting for Errol Spence because their whole era and their whole credibility is being challenged with this fight, especially if Pacquiao wins. The pound for pound list is going to get shaken up. Terrence Crawford needs to go down. Errol Spence needs to go down. And the list goes on and on. So thank you. Have a great day. Be well. Follow on Instagram at Good Boxing Podcast. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification button. Hit that like button. You guys know the drill. Have a great day.